here in Fergus Falls. I just want to welcome each of you here today and thank you, and it's fun to hear and see the energy in this room. And before I get to introducing Dr. Scott Jenson, who's going to beat Governor Walz in 47 days. Boy, do we really need Scott to win. Just wanted to recognize our other Republican candidates here today. Wanted to recognize Representative Jeff Backer. Jeff is just such a strong conservative leader for our area down at the state capitol. He's running to represent Fergus Falls down in the state house. He's going to do a great job. And so really appreciate Jeff and all of his support for being here today. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Also want to recognize Tom Murphy. He's our Republican candidate for the eastern half of Otter Tail County and for Douglas County. Comes from an agriculture background. He's going to be a really solid, common sense conservative leader from this area down to the state capitol. So thank you, Tom, for being here and for all your work. And then I know we have a bunch of local candidates here as well. And if you're a local candidate, could you just stand up and be recognized? And thank you for running for local office, whether it's school board, city council. We need good people in those positions. So folks, in 47 days, we need to make sure that Governor Walz doesn't get a second term. And there's so much at stake. And Dr. Scott Jenson, from the day that he announced he was running, had the idea that we need to heal Minnesota. And Minnesota has a lot of healing to do. You look at what the Democrats and Governor Walz have done to our economy, by pushing higher taxes and inflation, California car mandates that will hurt our rural way of life. They don't understand us out here in greater Minnesota. And we need to make sure that on November 8th, we send that message that enough is enough, and that we send Dr. Scott Jenson to the governor's residence to lead our state to heal Minnesota. So here's the thing, folks. On November 9th, when we wake up after that election day, I want everyone in this room to know that they've done everything they can to win. Because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take people here supporting Dr. Scott Jenson financially so that they can go up and get the ads and get messaging out to the voters. We need people to get out and door knock to make sure that we get all the concerned citizens in our community out to vote to elect Dr. Scott Jenson and all of our other Republican candidates. And so I just have a question. Who's with me that we're going to work really hard over the next 47 days to get Dr. Scott Jenson elected the next governor of Minnesota? Can I see your hands? So, Dr. Scott Jenson, thank you for coming to Fergus Falls, and we're excited. We're on the team, and you're going to win here on November 8th.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It is good to be here. I'm just going to try one thing, and if it doesn't work, just tell me. Can you hear me okay without the mic? Okay, then we're going to use the mic. I always like not having anything in my hands if I don't have to. Here's the deal. I'm proud to be a rock or a cow, whatever you want to call me. I'm a kid from Sleepy Eye, Minnesota. I'm the middle child of 5. I learned at an early age that if your older sister is bigger, smarter, and tougher than you, you better not pick a fight because it won't go well. My mom was my best friend. She died early of colon cancer. My dad was my hero. He died early of colon cancer. Sleepy Eye was a wonderful place to grow up. We had values, we knew who we were, and we recognized that sometimes it really does take a village to raise a child, and y'all pitch in. I went to the University of Minnesota for undergraduate, and I got into dental school. That was fine. I loved the biochemistry, I liked the anatomy, I liked all the sciences, but I found that I did not have a love affair with teeth. So it was time to get out of dental school. I went to the seminary, and I made 2 big decisions when I was in the seminary. 2 big decisions. The first one was I was dating this really hot chick, and I thought I'd best ask her to marry me. And that ended up being the best decision I've ever made in my life. Mary and I have been together for 44 years. We have 3 children. Christy's an anesthesiologist, Jackie's a family doctor, and our son Matt is an attorney, but we love him just as much as the doctors. Mary's a veterinarian, and once in my life, I tried to match up with her and see who could tell the most interesting story. So when I got done with the shift all night long, Mary said, how was your night? And I said, well, it's pretty interesting. I had one fellow who had a cardiac arrest 5 times in one night, and every time we were able to successfully resuscitate him. And when I left, he and his wife were chatting while she was drinking a cup of coffee, but we weren't letting him have anything by mouth for at least a little while. She thought that was a pretty interesting story. So I said to Mary, I said, how about you, sweetheart? What was going on in your day yesterday? Anything interesting? And she said, well, I did have one patient that was unique. And I said, what was that? And she said, well, I had a boa constrictor come in with pneumonia. Well, that sort of took the wind out of my sails. And sort of sarcastically, I just sort of sneered. I said, what'd you do? Give it a shot of penicillin? And she said, yes, on the left side. How did you know? So we don't compare stories anymore. The second big decision I made that year I was in the seminary was, I want to go into medicine. I want to be a family doc. I want to have the chance to talk to people one-on-one. I'm passionate about the way to get the best health care that we can get is when the patient is the decision maker. And I, as a physician, give the patient the confidence that they're up to the task of making the decisions about their health care. There will be times where patients will say, I don't know what decision to make here, and we'll walk through it. But I think without question, during the COVID pandemic, if we learned one thing, we saw that patients need to be able to say, I get to choose. I think we saw patients at times feeling abandoned by their doctors or their healthcare system. They felt like they were being given this choice or that, but there was nothing in between. I think we need to understand clearly that even though we don't talk a lot right now during the campaign season about our healthcare system, there's room for a lot of improvement. A lot of improvement. And I think that's a lesson that we all need to learn. So now, let me just tell you why you're here. You understand, I think at a very gut level, that something's happening that we could never have guessed. If someone had told us that Minnesota would look like it does today, 3 years ago, we probably would have scoffed at them. And we probably would have said, you've been watching too many grade B movies. We couldn't have imagined it. But here we are. Our world has turned upside down. Small example. My wife and I live perhaps 45 minutes away from downtown Minneapolis. We used to enjoy going downtown Minneapolis maybe once every month or two. Maybe we'd go to a play or go out for dinner. Maybe we'd take in a Twins game. We don't go down there much anymore. We always figure, well, where are we going to park? How does it look? Are things going okay? Is there anything else that might be going on that might cause it to be unsafe? The world has changed. And when we watch what's happening in our schools, the world has changed. The kids, it doesn't seem like innocence is really a gift that we give them. Instead, we're indoctrinating them. We're not really telling them what you do or how hard you work matters. We're sort of going a different direction, saying, well, what really matters is maybe the color of your skin or whether you're oppressed or not. When I grew up in Sleepyard, Minnesota in the 1960s, I remember we were taught, try to be colorblind. When you see someone, try not to see color. Just stick your hand out and make a new friend. But it seems like we've changed. When I was a kid, I think Mom and Dad, I remember Mom telling Dad, Carl, I think it's time that you have a talk with Scott about the birds and the bees. I was probably about 13, I don't know. But I remember Dad saying, yeah, I'll get to it, honey, I'll get to it. And I think when I was 21 or 22, he talked to me. It wasn't really the conversation he was most looking forward to. And I told him, Dad, I get it. I said, I've studied agriculture and I said, I've been doing some work on the bees and the pollinating, so I think you can just skip the lesson. So that was a relief for him. But the world has changed. And that's why you're here. You know at a gut level, there can be no standing on the sidelines. In a phrase, America's bleeding. We're hemorrhaging, and we know it. America needs our help. When Ronald Reagan said in the 1980s, freedom is never more than a generation away from extinction, we might have thought, those are some pretty lofty sounding words. But you know what? We're living them right now. We're living those words. America needs us to step forward. Teddy Roosevelt said it 110 years ago when he said, get out of the spectator seats, get in the arena, be willing to take the slings and the arrows. You're going to get bruised and bloody, but you've got to stand up for your values. You've got to stand up for what you believe in. People have asked me, running for governor, is that a bucket list thing for you? Heck no, I'd rather jump out of an airplane and see if the parachute opens. No, this isn't something I want. I'm a family doctor from Watertown, and I love doing what I do. But the words of Esther 4:14 in the Old Testament say this: have you considered you're in the position you're in for such a time as this? When I raised my hand 2.5 years ago saying, you're asking me to do death certificates with COVID differently than I've done them for 40 years of medicine, and I've been teaching med students and residents as a professor at the medical school for 30 years, I said, why would you do this? You didn't do this in 2018 when we had 80,000 people die of influenza. Why are you changing the way we do it? You're going to corrupt the value of the data we can glean from something like this. I fully expected an answer. I was in my last 6 or 7 months of being a senator, but I was still vice chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. I did not get an answer. What I got was a letter from the Board of Medical Practice 3 months later saying my license was being investigated. And it's been investigated 5 times now, and I'm in the midst of my 5th investigation. That's a whole lot different feeling for me internally than when in 2016 I was notified by the Minnesota Academy of Family Practice that I'd been chosen Family Doctor of the Year. So my life turned upside down, just like all of yours did. And so my wife and I said, we don't get to sit this one out. We've got to get involved. I'm not looking for a new career path. I'm no spring chicken. I'm 67 years old, and I figured if I wanted a new career path, I probably should have started a couple of decades ago. But I think there's a job to be done. And the job has to be something that you and I both make a commitment to. And that's what Jordan was saying. We've all got to be involved. So that's why you're here. You understand that we need to unite because this new normal that is bubbling up has got to be, at least in part, shaped by us, by common sense folks, cows and rocks, if you will. People who understand the value of work and, if you will, decency and innocence for our kids and things like that. So let's turn our attention real quickly to what are the issues during this campaign. Pretty clear. Whenever I'm talking to a group, I always think of the word ICE. It helps me to remember what I need to touch base on. So let's start with the I in ICE. I'll just give the whole word to you right now so you're not guessing while I'm talking. It's inflation, it's crime, and it's education. So let's start with inflation. I think we have to be fair. A governor doesn't control the economic cycles of a state completely. But I think we also have to say that there are policy decisions that will be inflationary. If you look at inflation that's affecting us right now, 8.5, 8.1, 9.1% in the last 3 months, if you look at that, ask one question. What's the driving force? It's energy costs. I think pretty much across the nation people would agree. Democrats and Republicans alike. Energy is a driving force behind inflation right now. Okay, what's happened? Well, I think if you go back to late March, early April of 2020, when the first lockdown was put in place, the cost of gas was $1.80 something. So now it's still about a double. Fuel oil for our homes has more than doubled in the last 15 months. Groceries have gone up 20-25%. Some of those things are because supply chains were fractured. When you fracture a supply chain and you don't get as much product, the product you do get will sell for a higher price. That's just sort of common sense. Another common sense thing, whatever you incentivize, you get more of. So if you tell people don't work, we'll give you $600 a week to not work, after a while, you're going to lose your labor force. You lose your labor force, you're going to lose your productivity. You lose your productivity, you won't have as much inventory. If you don't have as much inventory, whatever you do have will sell for a higher price. Those are inflationary things. But when you've got a governor who says for the first 3.5 years of his tenure that he wants to increase your state gas tax 75%, that's about 25 cents. That's inflationary. When you've got a governor who says, I don't really care what the legislature thinks, and I really don't care what you think. We're going to hook our wagon to the California car emission mandates, and when they do that, our refineries have to purchase carbon credits in order to do the work they do to get the gas and the pumps so we can put it in our tanks. That's inflationary. When we do these things, when we do anything to decrease production so we don't have the same amount of supply, we're driving the cost up. And Tim Walz has put in place inflationary policies repeatedly. Recently, he came out and he said that he wants to embrace the United Nations approach to green electricity. And what he came out with, he said he wants carbon-free electricity 100% in 2040. I don't know that we could even get there with all the money in the world, but the projections to get there cost every household in Minnesota almost $4,000 every year for the next 28 years. That certainly is inflationary. These are things that shouldn't be happening. The notion that we're going to follow California with their mandate that in 2035, 100% of new vehicles have to be electric vehicles. We have nowhere near the charging stations, the batteries, any of those kinds of things. 90% of the supply chain necessary to be successful hasn't even been built. We don't have the mining going on for the minerals of the nickel and the copper, the cadmium, the platinum. We're going to have to go to China to get it. That makes no sense at all. So let's move to the C in the word ice. Let's go to crime. This isn't complicated. If we want to stop crime, we've got to restore lawful behavior. The cops aren't the bad guys. They're not the bad gals. I'm old enough to remember when Pudge Michelson, the sheriff, if he caught me doing something like I wasn't supposed to do it, sometimes when I was a kid, one of the games we played, sometimes we'd ring a doorbell and then we'd run away as fast as we could. We got caught once in a while by Pudge. He said, Scott, we need to go have a conversation with Mom and Dad. Nope, I won't do this again for the rest of the year. He said, I want a promise for more than a year. But we've gone astray here. We need to have more cops on the street corners, to be sure. We need to have a restorative justice program. If you think that you get to deface a building that's not yours, you're not going to just have to serve your sentence or do your community work, but you're going to have to restore that building. If you put graffiti on a bridge, then you can be the person up there sanding it off and making it look pretty again. We need to have restorative justice. I don't care what age you are. And we need to understand that incarceration has to be used as a deterrent for repeat violent felons. I don't know if you read the story about Jacob Gunn. About 3 or 4 months ago, he was prosecuted. He'd shot into a vehicle 3 times, hit it 3 times. There was a 1- and a 4-year-old in the vehicle. Fortunately, they were not hurt. He was up for 2 felonies and 17 years. 2 felonies, 17 years. And the judge and the prosecuting attorney plea bargained it down to 4 months. And the judge told him he'd allow him to serve it in house arrest. Where's the deterrent? Why wouldn't he do this again? And we need to understand clearly that mandated minimum sentence means just that. We need to mandate minimum sentences. 43% of the time, mandated minimum sentences are reduced. Less than 1% of the time are they increased. And lastly, we need to remember the words of Teddy Roosevelt again. We need to enforce the law equally. No free passes. You don't get a free pass because your skin is a certain color or because you're a bigwig. We need to enforce the law equally and fairly. Let's go to the E in the word ICE. Inflation, crime, education. How did we go so wrong in terms of just trying to teach our kids basic ABCs? We want them to read, we want them to write, we want them to do arithmetic, we want them to know the history of our country. And we're not talking about a history that gets rewritten every generation or two because all of a sudden we think that, aren't we sort of uppity and don't we know how to do it? Yeah, Thomas Jefferson may have some stuff in his background. He's been dead 200 years. That doesn't make him any less brilliant when he wrote our Constitution. But these are the things that we need to do, and we're not doing them. We're not doing them at all. On the way up here, I was looking at an article in one of the news outlets, and they were talking about 100 people coming together in a community because they were so upset about some of the library books that are allowed in the children's area. And these children's books in the library area depict things that kids don't need to be seeing at 8 or 9 years of age. It's just ridiculous. We're taking away their innocence. We're taking away their ability just to be curious. Our education system's broken. We need to fund kids, not broken institutions. And what that means is we've got to give more options. We need more homeschooling. We need more private schools. We need more charter schools. We need to honor the teachers that are in our K through 12 public schools. The teachers aren't happy with what's going on. 40% of the teachers are leaving the profession before they've been in it 5 years. 40% of the teachers are leaving the profession of teaching, and they haven't even been in 5 years. We can do this so much better, and we have to. And the way to do that is to start creating a bigger menu. As a family doctor, I can't tell you how many times I've seen kids between 18 and 25 come in to see me. I've taken care of them through their sprained ankles, their strep throats, maybe their fractured arms. But between 18 and 25, they'll come in and they're anxious, and frequently they're depressed. They felt that when they went out of high school, they either had to go to college or they had to go to work. They only had 2 choices, and they maybe chose college. And after 2 years, they didn't have a thing to show for it. They had no idea what they wanted to do. They owed $50,000. They disappointed mom, dad, grandparents, their teachers, their friends, and themselves. And that's when they start getting suicidal. It's a very tender time of one's life when you're starting to be disillusioned. The world's not easy out there. We need to do better. We need to make sure that we're trying to do a better job of matching up when kids leave school, high school, that they match up with the workplace needs. We should be helping kids go into the trades. We should be, frankly, in sophomore, junior, senior year, we should be saying, listen, we're going to put you in a classroom of some sort in the mornings, but in the afternoons, we want you down at the hospital learning how to draw blood and doing EKGs and pulmonary function tests. We want you at the cabinet shop so you learn how to work with tools. We want you down at the car dealership so you're fixing cars. We want you starting to learn how to operate heavy machinery. There's so many things. We want you to think about going in the military. We want you to think about whatever. But we've got to give the kids a big menu. The last big decision we made in education, arguably, was in the 1980s when a Democratic governor, Rudy Perpich, put in place open enrollment and post-secondary enrollment options. We need to expand that post-secondary enrollment option so it includes trades. That's a way better place for them to go. I mean, quite frankly, I remember going to CPI High School where I graduated, and there were 65 kids, and 2/3 went to college. And quite frankly, probably not even a half of that should have gone, because so many of the kids, it just didn't work for them. We need to do better with our kids. We really do. And we can. But I think the next big idea for education has to be let the funds follow the kids. Let parents choose. I've had success stories with some of my patients where a kid will make a decision to leave this school district when he's a sophomore and go to this school district. And it made all the difference in the world. Instead of being on a path to failure, they succeeded immensely. That's what we need to do. Those are the big issues that people are talking about. Inflation, crime, education. But I'll tell you what I think really is going to be the determining factor in this election. I think it has to be about leadership. I think we have to ask ourselves, what kind of a leader was Ronald Reagan in the 1980s? Because that was when I first got involved in politics. I would say that when I think of Reagan, I think of his conviction that we should elevate our faith, that we should be free, that we should respect the work of our founding fathers, that family matters, that we should have less government, that we should have lower taxes, that we should protect life from beginning to end. And if you look at what happened during COVID, who would have ever thought that we would do to our frail elderly in the nursing homes what happened to them, where they had to die miserable lives alone, frequently bathing in their own urine and stool. And yet that's what happened on our watch. When you think of Reagan, he also told us that wherever you see it, celebrate exceptionalism. If someone does something well, celebrate it. If a kid's really good at tiddlywinks, celebrate it. If a young girl is really good at running, celebrate it. If a young boy's really good at hitting a ball, celebrate it. If someone's really good at singing, celebrate it. That's what we should be doing. And he said, always regard the individual liberty. Don't make decisions that take away our individual rights. Because if you do that, that's a slippery slope. And he told us that communism is a failed experiment. We don't have to go that path again. And he also said that you get peace through strength, not by begging. If you look at our international situation right now, we've got so many crises, we don't even know where to start. But the last thing he said, and I remember one of his speeches, was he said, America needs to strive to be the bright, shining city on a hill. And when you put that in individual terms for us, that means that we need to strive to be the best version of who we can be. And if we do okay today, then tomorrow we've got to outdo today. We've got to be the best version of who we are, and that's what we need to do. And as a leader, that's what we need to do. When my wife and I said we're going to run, I said, Mary, we're going to speak truth. I don't care how much trouble it gets me in. I didn't realize how good I would get at getting into trouble. I've become very proficient at it. But we also said we're going to resist groupthink. We're not going to flinch. We are not going to knuckle. You can look at me as a pit bull with a pork chop, and you're not getting my pork chop. And we're going to speak for all Minnesotans, especially those Minnesotans who live in the twilight of life, who spend their day in a wheelchair, or disabled, or developmentally challenged. There's so much more we could be doing. You can't have adequate support if you're in a wheelchair and the PCA who you rely on is getting paid $11 an hour. It isn't going to work. We need to do so much better, and we can. I think what we've seen from Governor Walz is a certain style of leadership. I think that we know what he's going to do over the next 6 weeks. He's going to try to demonize Scott Jenson and Matt Burke. He's got the money to do it. I mean, he can peg an ad up there 5 times an hour. We don't have that kind of money. We're going to be more visible, if you will, going forward, but we don't have that kind of money. And we know that he's going to distract the voters. He's going to tell you this isn't about reducing inflation and restoring public safety and, if you will, honoring our children. He's going to say, well, it's this is the issue, even though it's not on the ballot. That's what he's going to do. And we know that he's going to dodge his own responsibility. We had a press conference this morning at the Capitol, and we called him up. We said this, Governor Walz, in 2005, there was a battalion of soldiers asking, where's our commander? In 2020, on the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul, we had the National Guard asking, where's our leader? In that same time frame, we had Minnesotans and journalists and TV anchor people all over the state of Minnesota saying, where is our governor? When it came time for him to do his duty, what he showed us was that he needed to measure the political winds. Would they be okay with him? He didn't want to come down on him too hard. At the state fair about 3 or 4 weeks ago, he said to Jason DeRusha during an interview, he said, the reason I let the 3rd Precinct building go was because that was the best advice I got from law enforcement, implying that law enforcement made that decision. No, the buck stops at your desk, Tim Walz. That was your decision. You made a casual decision because you were hoping it would appease your hard left base and the rioters and the demonstrators. And because you did that, you literally became the godfather of all the violence that went across America. We had cities burned that didn't need to burn. But when they saw what happened in Minneapolis, St. Paul, literally the mayhem followed. That's the kind of leadership we're getting. We called him out today and said, does it matter at all that when it came to daycare, we lost hundreds of millions of dollars through fraud, and after a year of Tim Walz being governor, he gave the Inspector General, who was partly responsible for that debacle, another job in a different department, and she could keep her 6-figure salary, and by the way, no discipline at all. If you look at the homeless, we had tens of millions of dollars squandered, and people didn't get a home. If you look at what we've not done for our veterans, once again, dollars squandered. If you look at the most recent one, Feeding Our Future, $250 million. The Department of Education says, gee, this one company has gone from $3 million to $200 million in a year or so. Maybe we should flag it. So they flag it, and that Feeding Our Future goes to the courts and says, hey, they're not paying us like they should. The judge says, start paying them again, and that's where it stops. They just make the payments. Millions of dollars. Where was Tim Walz? Why didn't they appeal the decision? Why didn't they say, hold it, what the heck's going on here? So today he came out and he said when he was advised of that decision by the judge, he was, quote, speechless. I'm sorry, Tim Walz. Being speechless isn't good enough. Today he calls for an investigation of the judge. The judge. He didn't call for, a heavier prosecution of the people who absconded with the money, the millions of dollars that were supposed to feed kids. More than 100 million, more than 1 million meals never got served, but they got paid for them. That's what happened. Waste, fraud, and abuse. Look at the Southwest Light Rail. That's a project it's $1 billion over, it's gonna be 10 years late. And it was a doomed project at the beginning. I've gotten criticized because I've said, certainly we should not be double taxing Social Security. And I don't think we should be, I think it's unethical. But I don't think the conversation should stop there. I think we should ask the hard question. We've got a $10 to $12 billion surplus. What would Minnesota look like if we did not have a personal income tax? 20% of the states do it. Why can't we talk about it? People say, you can't possibly do it. Well, you know what? I've been studying spreadsheets for the last 6 weeks. And here's how you do it. You say, we're going to try to get to a no income tax in 8 years. In the first 4 years, we're going to try to get halfway there. What do we need to do? We need to do 3 things. And in 2026, every one of our 4 income tax brackets would be cut in half. What are the 3 things we have to do? The first thing we do is in the first year, we cut government spending 10%. That would put us right back to the 2019 levels of spending. Government spending has gone up 75% in a little more than a decade. The average wage earner in Minnesota has gone up 25%. Government's done a 75% increase. We can certainly trim 10%. Then the next step is we cap our spending for the next 3 years. And the third step is we use our surplus to fill in backfill, and we're there. We have now cut our income taxes in half. We press pause in 2026, and we say we know we have revenue coming from two sources. One is the inflation that had been growing, and we hadn't gone up in our spending. That'll be a chunk of money to be sure. And two, we'll know that by being an economic hub of Minnesota, of the Midwest, we will have brought corporations to Minnesota. We would have more corporate revenue. And then at that point, maybe we can get the rest of the way. Or maybe we can only get halfway there. But what if we were able to take the lower two income tax brackets and reduce those by 75% and the top two and reduce them by 50%? Why can't we have these discussions? To me, that's what leading is about. It's not trying to win a popularity contest. It's leading the hard questions, having the hard conversations. So here we are. We know that where Minnesota's at, we cannot possibly endure another 4 years of what we've had the last 4 years. The lawlessness has bled across the state of Minnesota. Shoot 'em on. Last week at the Edina homecoming game, in the third quarter, the announcer was announcing, perhaps you should go home right now because the police from 3 different cities can no longer control the fights that are breaking out all around the grandstands here in Edina. We think you maybe should go home, it's not safe. This isn't just on Lake Street. This isn't just in black communities or in minority communities. This is our entire land. But we've got a chance. We know that Tim Walz has the machine. We know he's got the money. We know he's got the media frequently in his back pocket. But what he doesn't have is you. He doesn't have the movement. And there is a movement. Some, such as me, I believe that a divine energy frequently touches our lives. For me, every morning I gain great solace about looking at Isaiah 40:31, where the verse says, they who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. This is no time to faint or be weary. This is a time to do as Hebrews 4:14 says, hold fast to the beliefs you profess. We all know in here that we have a moral compass. And that moral compass drives our decisions. It drives our judgment of what we see around us in our world. Thank heavens that we have a moral compass. It shapes us differently than the other mammalian species. So what he doesn't have is a movement, and we do. There's an energy across Minnesota. Frankly, 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, a beautiful day, and you come out to listen to a Norwegian from Sleepy Eye, you're either crazy or you're incredibly motivated. That's what's happening. So he doesn't get to do that. He doesn't get to grab onto your energy, and you're changing the world. We have the chance to change the world, and that's why we're taking the fight to Tim Walz. We're saying, we're not buying what you're selling, and we're going to win. And when we do, we're going to rewrite emergency powers right away. We're going to absolutely get photo ID in place and do what 46 out of 47 countries already do in Europe. And we're going to, if you will, have the money follow the kid. We're going to bring a renaissance to public education. And you know who's with us on that? Teachers. As Republicans, we've done a crappy job of respecting the work teachers do. I would never want you to judge me based on what you think of the American Medical Association. Judge me based on how I am as a doctor. And teachers are no different. Don't judge teachers based on what you think of the union. Judge teachers based on the fact that they go into teaching to touch kids' lives. If we want to unleash Minnesota, we need to let miners mine and loggers log and teachers teach and farmers farm. We need to step it up with the agribusiness because, quite frankly, farmers have been ignored too long. Greater Minnesota communities do not have the kind of broadband connectivity that we have in the urban areas. We've done precious little to make certain that family farms can stay in the family. And I've said over and over again, I'll say it again, over my dead body will Minnesota be selling private farms to public corporations outside of our country. That's not going to happen. So folks, we're in this together. We're going to take the fight to Tim Walz. We're going to win. And when we do, we're never going to look back. And on November 9th, we're going to say, we helped create a new day. And I'll tell you what, nothing is more important than that. Thank you so much. I'd be glad to stand for a few questions. I think there's a woman back here that promised me a question, if I had time. Any questions over here? Perhaps I answered. Yes, ma'am. Sit you down. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Jenson, for running. I think one thing in my mind is about the red flag law that you have participated before. Maybe you should talk about that and clear up that.
Well, there's a question about Second Amendment rights. When I was in the Senate, I put my name on a couple of bills. One I took off. The one bill I had was the straw vote. The question, there's several issues with Second Amendment. First off, I think what we need to do is we need to do three things in regards to our Second Amendment. Pass constitutional carry, pass stand your ground, and get castle doctrine in your home, your business, and your house. That is it. And there's no reason why we do this. If we win the House, the Senate, and get the government, we should be able to do that in the first 100 days without question. There's been some rumor about red flag legislation, but red flag legislation is lousy legislation. I've never supported it. I don't know where that came from. But if you actually look at red flag legislation, it violates a lot more than just your Second Amendment. It actually violates your Fifth Amendment as well as the 14th Amendment. And it absolutely strips you of your due process. Red flag, we don't need red flag legislation. As a physician, I've accessed 72-hour holds. If you think that someone's a danger, going to their home, surprising them and telling them, we're going to take all your guns away, you're not going to get all their guns, you just will lit a fuse. If you really think that there's a problem here, you need to tell that person, we need to ask you to come with us, we want to just evaluate, make sure things are, you're okay. That's what you do, and we've done that for decades, and we don't like to do it because it's not something you want to impose on someone, but that's the fact of the matter. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I've worked in healthcare field, especially with mental health. And one thing I'm finding is an incredible weakness is we are giving psychotropic drugs rampant, including children, and we can't even legally test it on them. And it continues to create more iatrogenic disease processes, and then we turn around and blame the person we've been giving the drug that has such horrible side effects.
Let me just grab on it. It's a big question. There's probably two big parts to it. First off, in the arena of mental health, are we doing enough? Certainly we're not. I mean, certainly what we're doing is paying lip service. You're seeing politicians doing that. You're seeing health insurance companies do that. But when it actually comes down to taking care of mental health, we're not doing it. But then the question sort of hones in on what are we doing to our young people in regards to psychotropic drugs. Psychotropic drugs are typically not antidepressants. Typically, they're drugs that affect the thinking process. Oftentimes, we think of schizophrenia, bipolar disease, things like that. My brother was schizophrenic, and prior to his suicide, when he was on psychotropic drugs, caused a lot of side effects, and he wasn't on them until he was in his 20s. But when you put 8-year-olds on psychotropic drugs, you get a bizarre array of behaviors. And if you look at that 8-year-old and say, we're not going to accept that kind of behavior, well, frankly, they're not even in control of that part of their behavior. If you want to look at disparities in terms of educational achievement, literally, you can look at a map of Minnesota, and you can look at zip codes, and you look at test scores, and you look at the pharmacies that have been prescribing psychotropic drugs to kids, and there's a matchup that shouldn't be there, and that I think was what you're speaking to. We're absolutely becoming a pill-driven society, and it's one thing if you want to do that when you're 50 years old and take as many pills as you want, go for it, knock yourself out. But we're talking about 8-year-olds, we're talking about 12-year-olds, we're talking about 6-year-olds, and the fact of the matter is we've got to stop using these psychotropic drugs as if they're water, because they're not. They're devastating, and they frequently do cause, if you will, suicidal ideation. So the very pill that we're using to try to bring some, if you will, levelness in terms of their mental psyche, frequently drives them to commit suicide. I've got time for one more question, then we've got to get over to Durham, I think. Yes, sir.
Governor-elect, you're talking about crime. How does the legislator keep the judges in line with the law?
The question is, if we're going to talk about crime, how do we deal with the judges? There's probably a short-term and a mid-term and a long-term answer for that. The long-term answer, the one that takes the longest, is the governor gets a chance to make appointments. And those appointments, you have the opportunity to make sure that you've got someone who's going to follow the Constitution, who's going to follow the mandated minimum sentences and things like that. And I would certainly do that. But that's not going to get us that fast response that we want on the short term. I think on the short term, what we have to do is we have to be ready to go to battle. And that means the governor has got to use his or her bully pulpit and fight hard and help some of these organizations get the kind of data that people like you and I would want. What do I mean by that? Well, you would probably like to know which judges in the state of Minnesota are not following the mandated minimum sentences. Which ones are taking someone who's up for 17 years, 2 felonies, and plea bargaining it down to 4 months? That data is out there. Let's put that out there. Let's make that known. Let's make these communities know. So, gee whiz, our neighbor 2 doors down, we've always sort of been proud of the fact that he's a judge. But gee whiz, he's a knucklehead. He's responsible for 4 more people being dead because he wouldn't use a mandated minimum sentence. We can use the bully pulpit. We can help shape people's behavior in the same way that we're trying to do it this election with the whole concern about, do we have a trustworthy election coming out? People are concerned about it. What we're trying to do this election cycle is we're trying to make sure that we have a split between Republican and Democrat election judges. We're trying to have poll watchers out there. We're trying to do some pre-canvassing of districts. We're trying to make certain we have lawyers available, so if we see something fishy happening on November 8th, we can get to the judge and ask for an injunction on those ballots. We're trying to do everything we can, and that's exactly what we need to do with judges. We need to use the bully pulpit of the governor and the media access and say, we've got to stop this right now. That would be the short-term thing we can do. But then the midterm thing we can do is we need to look to our legislature. We need to ask the legislature, listen, you have the ability to pass forceful laws that don't allow the judges and the prosecuting attorneys to deviate as far as they have been from the Sentencing Commission. And that's what we need to do. And then another short-term thing we can do is the governor gets to appoint several people to the Sentencing Commission, and they help determine the guidelines. And so that'll be another thing. But we've got to play hardball. And if we think that we're going to sort of get around this by, praying that ice cream cones are going to fall from the sky tomorrow, we're not going to get anywhere. This is a battle. There's a cultural war being fought on this political landscape this time around. And we've got to stop it, or we will not recognize Minnesota. And Minneapolis will have no way to push. 100 restaurants are locked down from 2.5 years ago in Minneapolis. Some have perhaps restarted with different names. But we lost 100 restaurants. We've lost a ton of businesses. You remember how dark it was. You remember that your business might not have been safe and you had to close. Yours was okay, but you didn't have. Yours was essential, but yours wasn't. You couldn't go to the hardware store to get a hammer, but you go 6 blocks further, you can get one in the aisle at the Home Depot, congregating with 25 people all buying hammers and touching the same ones. And you couldn't go to church, but you could go to the big box liquor store. This is nuts. Yes, ma'am.
So what are you gonna, what's your idea about the election? Because like you said, a lot of people are really concerned about the election and
I'll repeat what I said.
voting from home. Yeah. I mean, at our house, we got like 3 paper ballots in the mail.
Yeah,
it was awful. Yeah. People should vote in person.
I know that you would love me to give you a brilliant answer that makes you feel better and you sleep well tonight, but I can't. Because right now we're stuck with what we've got. The election is already starting tomorrow. I think early voting starts tomorrow. So we know that. Okay. So what we have to do is we have to be as, if you will, industrious and monitoring as we possibly can. That means we have election judges, and instead of it being 20,000 Democrats and 3,000 Republicans, as in 2020, it's a split this year, 12 and 12 approximately. Do the pre-canvassing. We're watching areas that we think might be inclined to maybe have some shenanigans go on. We're going to try to stop that, nip it in the bud. We've got election judges that we're taking from these districts, and they've been there before. Maybe they're attorneys, maybe they're hard-nosed election judges with a lot of experience. We're putting her or him into this area over here where we think we really need to have strong voices. We're trying to do all that we can, but there is no magic answer. The magic answer is win in November, pass photo ID in January, and then we can stop bickering about this, which we've been bickering for the last 20 years, and it hasn't been one side of the aisle. I mean, you can go back to the hanging chads in 2000, and the Democrats weren't so happy with Bush becoming president in December, a month later. You can go to 2016, you can go to 2018, you can go to 2020. Let's just stop the bickering and solve the problem.
When you're governor?
Yes.
Dr. Jenson, what can all of us here do in this room to make sure that you win on November 8th and become our next governor?
Thank you. I appreciate it. And that's going to be the last question. You've got a homework assignment. If you can support your candidates that we've already met today, if you can support us financially, thank you, thank you, thank you. But you do have a homework assignment. For the next 47, 48 days, we need you to touch base with 3 or 4 of your friends, your neighbors, the people you work with, and just ask them one question. One question. Say, do you think if we have 4 more years like the last 4 years, do you think we'll be better off? Because I think we just need to get people thinking. There's something profoundly wrong. America's bleeding. Minnesota's hurting. Minnesota doesn't look like what it used to look like. We need to change that. That's what we need to do. Folks, we're in this together. Nobody on the sidelines. It's been an absolute privilege for me to be here with you. Middle of the afternoon on Thursday, some 7,500 people here. You humble me. You absolutely humble me. So thank you very much.